Montana Territory, 1878. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Danielle Foster approached the courthouse steps, chin raised despite the weight of 20 pairs of condemning eyes. Her green calico dress, once her Sunday best, hung loose on her frame after weeks in the sheriff's custody. The October wind cut through the thin fabric, but she refused to shiver. Pride was all she had left. "Murderer!" someone hissed from the crowd. Danielle kept her eyes fixed on the weathered courthouse door. The accusations weren't true, but truth seemed to matter little in Pine Creek since her father's death. Being a woman alone on a valuable piece of land had made her vulnerable. Being accused of poisoning her neighbor's cattle had made her a pariah. Sheriff Mills gripped her elbow too tightly as they climbed the steps. "Best confess, Miss Foster. Judge Hannity ain't known for leniency with cattle killers." "I can't confess to something I didn't do," she replied, voice steady despite her racing heart. The courtroom fell silent as she entered. Men in dusty work clothes and women in modest dresses filled every bench, their faces a uniform mask of judgment. No friendly faces, no allies. Her court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Peterson, barely looked up from his papers as she was led to the defense table. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Hannity," called the bailiff. As the proceedings began, Danielle felt a strange calm settle over her. She'd lost her mother to consumption when she was 12, her father to a heart attack 3 months ago, and now she stood to lose the family ranch and possibly her life. The evidence against her was circumstantial but damning. A bottle of arsenic found in her barn, angry words exchanged with Clayton Moore over water rights, and her refusal to sell her land despite mounting debts. The prosecutor, a slick man from Helena named Rutherford, painted her as a desperate, conniving woman. "Miss Foster had means, motive, and opportunity," he said, pacing before the jury of 12 men. 8 prized cattle dead, gentlemen. 8. And all the evidence points to the defendant. Peterson's defense was lackluster at best. He barely objected to Rutherford's characterizations and failed to call any witnesses who might speak to Danielle's character. By midday, Danielle knew with grim certainty that she would be convicted. The ranch would go to auction, likely ending up in the hands of the mining company that had been pressuring landowners throughout the valley. As Rutherford called his final witness, the courtroom door creaked open. Heads turned as a tall stranger entered, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair and eyes the color of gunmetal. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality: black coat, crisp white shirt, dark trousers. A gentleman cowboy, out of place in their small town. Judge Hannity frowned. "Court is in session, sir." The stranger nodded respectfully. "My apologies, Your Honor. I've ridden hard from Helena with information pertinent to this case." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Danielle straightened in her chair, hope fluttering dangerously in her chest. "And you are?" the judge asked. "Harrison Cole, Your Honor. I'm a private investigator hired by the Cattlemen's Association to look into a series of livestock poisonings across 3 territories." The judge's bushy eyebrows rose. "Approach the bench, Mr. Cole." Danielle watched as the stranger, Harrison Cole, spoke quietly with the judge and both attorneys. Peterson looked surprised, Rutherford displeased. After several minutes, the judge banged his gavel. "Court will recess until tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Mr. Cole, I expect your evidence to be organized and compelling, or I'll hold you in contempt for this interruption." As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with speculation, Danielle remained seated, unsure what had just happened. The sheriff approached to return her to her cell, but Harrison Cole stepped between them. "Sheriff, I'd like to request Miss Foster's release into my custody. I have documentation from the territorial governor supporting my investigation." The sheriff scowled. "That ain't proper procedure." "Neither is rushing to judgment when evidence suggests a pattern of crime across territories," Harrison countered, producing an official-looking document. "Miss Foster's insight is crucial to my investigation, and I can assure her appearance tomorrow." After examining the paper, the sheriff reluctantly agreed, though his expression suggested he'd rather not. "She's your responsibility now, Cole. If she runs, it's your neck in the noose alongside hers." Harrison turned to Danielle, offering a slight bow. "Miss Foster, if you'll accompany me? I believe we have much to discuss." Danielle studied him warily. "Why would you help me, Mr. Cole? You don't know me." His expression softened slightly. "I know injustice when I see it." Shall we? Outside, the afternoon sun had warmed the air. Harrison led her to a small restaurant across from the courthouse, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. Once seated in a corner booth, he ordered coffee and stew for them both. "I imagine prison food leaves much to be desired," he said, his deep voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "Why are you really helping me?" Danielle asked, ignoring his attempt at pleasantry. "The Cattlemen's Association has no love for small ranchers like me." Harrison studied her for a moment. "You're direct. I appreciate that." He lowered his voice. "The truth is, I believe you've been framed. The cattle poisonings follow the path of the proposed railway line. Your neighbor, Moore, sold his property to Western Pacific 3 weeks before accusing you." Danielle's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "I knew it wasn't coincidence. They've been trying to buy my land since Father died. Your land sits at a crucial junction for their planned route. Without it, they'd need to detour around the mountain pass, adding considerable expense." The waitress brought their stew, and Danielle realized how desperately hungry she was. As she ate, Harrison explained his investigation into similar cases across Montana and Wyoming territories. Small ranchers accused of crimes, their land seized or sold under duress, and later acquired by the railway. "But why help me specifically?" Danielle asked when he finished. Harrison hesitated, something unreadable crossing his face. "Your father, Jonathan Foster, once saved my life during the war. I was wounded at Shiloh, separated from my regiment. He carried me to safety despite the risk to himself." Danielle's throat tightened. "He never spoke of it. He was a humble man. When I read about your case in the territorial newspaper, I recognized his name. I owe him a debt I can never repay, but helping his daughter seemed to start." She studied him, this stranger who had traveled so far on the strength of a wartime debt. His eyes held integrity, but also something more, a sadness that matched her own. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Harrison said with quiet confidence, "you walk free." That night, Danielle slept in the town's small hotel, the first real bed she'd had in weeks. Harrison took the room adjacent to hers, a gesture both protective and proper. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Freedom seemed too precarious to trust. Morning arrived with pale sunlight and renewed anxiety. Harrison met her in the hotel dining room, freshly shaved and dressed in a formal suit that transformed him from trail rider to gentleman. He carried a leather portfolio and exuded calm confidence. "Are you ready, Miss Foster?" She nodded, smoothing her wrinkled dress. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was even more crowded than the previous day, news of the mysterious investigator having spread throughout Pine Creek. Harrison guided Danielle to the defense table with a reassuring hand at her elbow. Unlike Sheriff Mills' grip, his touch was gentle, supportive. When court convened, Judge Hannity wasted no time. "Mr. Cole, you claim to have evidence pertinent to this case. The court's patience is limited." "Thank you, Your Honor." Harrison rose with practiced ease. "With the court's permission, I'd like to present evidence that Miss Foster is the victim of a conspiracy, not the perpetrator of any crime." Over the next hour, Harrison methodically laid out his case. He presented documentation showing Western Pacific Railway's land acquisitions along a proposed route, acquisitions that frequently followed criminal accusations against the original owners. He produced chemical analysis showing the poison used on Moore's cattle match samples from 3 other cases in different counties. Most damning was a telegram he had intercepted between Moore and a Western Pacific agent, discussing payment for resolving the Foster situation. The courtroom erupted at this revelation, forcing the judge to bang his gavel repeatedly. "Order. I will have order." When quiet returned, Harrison delivered his final evidence. "Your Honor, I've brought a witness from Helena who can testify that the arsenic found in Miss Foster's barn was planted there. Mr. Thomas Jenkins worked for Western Pacific until his conscience got the better of him." A nervous-looking man in a clerk's suit stood from the back row. Rutherford jumped to his feet, objecting vehemently, but the evidence was too compelling to dismiss. By mid-afternoon, the judge called for the jury's verdict. It took them less than 30 minutes to return. "Not guilty," announced the foreman. The words washed over Danielle like spring rain. Not guilty. Free. She barely registered the judge's formal dismissal or the chaos that followed as reporters descended on Jenkins for statements about railway corruption. Harrison guided her outside, away from the clamor. On the courthouse steps, he turned to her, his expression softening from professional to personal. "It's over, Miss Foster. You can go home now." "Because of you," she said, emotion making her voice unsteady. "I stood trial alone until a kind stranger said, 'I believe in your innocence.' How can I ever repay you? Your father would never have accepted repayment for doing what was right. Neither will I." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Though I would welcome the opportunity to call on you, should you permit it." Danielle felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation so foreign after months of fear and grief that she hardly recognized it as hope. "I would like that very much, Mr. Cole." "Harrison, please." "Harrison," she repeated, testing the name on her lips. "And I'm Danielle." The late October sun bathed them in golden light as they stood there, two strangers connected by fate, justice, and perhaps something more. True to his word, Harrison called on Danielle 3 days later, bringing not flowers but practical supplies, seeds for spring planting, coffee, sugar, and flour. The gesture touched her more than roses ever could have. He understood the precariousness of her situation, how the months of legal trouble had depleted her resources. "The ranch looks better than I expected," he commented as they walked the property boundaries, the mountains rising purple and imposing in the distance. "Father taught me everything: animal husbandry, crop rotation, fence repair. I can do the work of any man," Danielle said, pride evident in her voice. "What I lacked was protection from men like Moore and the railway agents." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "The world isn't kind to women alone, regardless of their capabilities. It's a failing of our society, not yours." His understanding, free from condescension, surprised her. Most men found her independence threatening or amusing. Harrison seemed to admire it. As autumn deepened toward winter, Harrison extended his stay in Pine Creek. He took a room at the boarding house in town but spent most days at the Foster Ranch, helping with repairs before the snow set in. Together they mended fences, reinforced the barn roof, and preserved the last of the garden's bounty. Neighbors who had shunned Danielle during her trial gradually returned, shamefaced and bearing small offerings. A jar of preserves, fresh-baked bread, offers to help with the heavy work. Harrison's presence seemed to legitimize her again in their eyes. "They're fair-weather friends," Danielle observed bitterly one evening as they sat by the fire after a long day's work. "People fear what they don't understand, and nothing frightens a community more than the suggestion that justice can fail," Harrison replied, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "They're trying to make amends in the only way they know how. You make excuses for them because you didn't see how they looked at me, like I was already guilty." Her voice caught. "I thought I would hang Harrison. I truly did." He set down his cup and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "I can't imagine your fear. But holding on to bitterness only punishes you, not them." Danielle looked at him, this man who had saved her without expecting anything in return. In the firelight, the hard lines of his face softened, and she noticed for the first time a small scar near his right eye. Without thinking, she reached up to touch it. "From Shiloh?" she asked softly. He caught her hand, holding it gently against his cheek. "No, that one came later, in a less noble fight." The air between them thickened with unspoken feelings. Harrison's eyes darkened as they dropped to her lips, and Danielle felt herself leaning closer, drawn by an invisible force. The clock chimed 8, breaking the spell. Harrison cleared his throat and stood, releasing her hand. "It's getting late. I should return to town before the weather turns." Danielle walked him to the door, confusion and disappointment warring within her. As he settled his hat on his head, he paused. "Danielle, He stopped, seeming to wrestle with himself. "I've received a telegram from the Cattlemen's Association. They want me in Wyoming by the end of the month for another investigation." Her heart sank. "Oh, I see. I don't think you do." He smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his serious face. "I declined. I've decided to establish my practice here in Montana Territory. Pine Creek seems as good a place as any to settle." Joy bubbled up inside her, but caution tempered it. "What about your work? Your obligations? There are other investigators. And I've found something here worth staying for." His eyes held hers, the meaning clear. After he left, Danielle stood on the porch watching his figure disappear down the road toward town, snow beginning to dust his broad shoulders. For the first time since her father's death, the ranch didn't feel oppressively lonely. The winter of 1878 to 79 proved brutal, with blizzards sealing off the mountain passes for weeks at a time. Harrison moved his few possessions from the boarding house to a small cabin on Danielle's property, ostensibly to help protect the livestock from rustlers and predators. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but after her acquittal, few dared criticize her openly. In truth, Harrison slept in the cabin and Danielle in the main house, their relationship blossoming slowly in the quiet isolation of winter. During long evenings, they shared stories by lamplight. Harrison's childhood in Boston, his education at Harvard cut short by the war, his drift westward after Shiloh's seeking purpose. Danielle told him of her mother's gentle wisdom, her father's stubborn integrity, and her own dreams of expanding the ranch once the railway threat was neutralized. "You could raise horses," Harrison suggested one night as they played chess before the fire. "This valley has excellent grazing, and the army always needs good mounts." Danielle considered the board, moving her knight. "I've thought of that. Father always said our land produced horses with strong lungs and sure feet because of the altitude." "Smart man," Harrison murmured, studying her rather than the chess pieces. "Your move, Mr. Cole," she reminded him, fighting a blush under his steady gaze. By February, their routine had developed a comfortable intimacy. They shared meals, worked side by side during the day, and found endless topics of conversation. Harrison revealed himself to be well-read and thoughtful, with progressive views on women's suffrage and Native American rights that surprised and delighted Danielle. Yet despite their growing closeness, Harrison maintained a careful physical distance. He never again came as close to kissing her as he had that autumn night. Sometimes Danielle caught him watching her with longing, but he always looked away when their eyes met. One evening, as a late winter storm howled outside, Danielle finally asked the question that had been troubling her. "Harrison, are you courting me?" He looked up from the book he'd been reading, startled by her directness. That is my hope, yes. If it's welcome. Then why do you hold yourself apart from me? You hardly touch me, even my hand." Harrison closed his book, his expression serious. "Because I respect you too much to compromise your reputation further. This community has already judged you harshly once. I don't care what they think. You should. This is your home. These people are your neighbors, your market for livestock, your community in times of need." He sighed. "And there's more. You were vulnerable when we met. I never want you to think I took advantage of that vulnerability." Danielle crossed the room to stand before him, courage born of months of unspoken feelings. "I was vulnerable then. I'm not now. I know my own mind, Harrison Cole." She took his hand and placed it against her cheek, mirroring his gesture from months before. "I care deeply for you. If you feel the same, then court me properly, without this wall between us." Harrison stood, his height making her tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His hand moved from her cheek to cradle the back of her head, fingers tangling in her dark hair. "I've loved you since the first day in that courtroom," he confessed, voice rough with emotion. "Your courage, your dignity in the face of injustice. I intended only to repay a debt to your father, but I found myself instead in debt to you, for showing me what true strength looks like." He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to retreat, but Danielle rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they separated, Harrison pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll speak to Reverend Matthews tomorrow." "About what?" Danielle asked, still dazed from the kiss. Harrison smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she'd come to adore. "About publishing the banns. Unless you object to becoming Mrs. Cole before spring planting." Joy bubbled up in Danielle's chest, expanding until she thought she might float away with it. "I think that's an excellent timeline, Mr. Cole." The following Sunday, Harrison escorted Danielle to church, where Reverend Matthews announced their intention to marry. The congregation's reaction was mixed: surprise, speculation, and some genuine congratulations. Mrs. Whitaker, the town's self-appointed moral guardian, sniffed disapprovingly, but Sheriff Mills tipped his hat in grudging respect. After the service, Eliza Johnson, the schoolteacher, approached them with a warm smile. "I'm delighted for you both. Miss Foster, the school board has reconsidered your application to teach music lessons. We would be pleased if you would start after your wedding." It was a small olive branch, but significant. Slowly, Pine Creek was trying to make amends. As winter reluctantly released its grip on the mountains, preparations for both spring planting and the wedding occupied every waking hour. Harrison threw himself into ranch work with the same methodical dedication he had shown in investigating Danielle's case. He hired 2 local boys to help with the heavier tasks and purchased additional cattle to replace those lost during Danielle's ordeal. "You're spending too much," Danielle protested when he returned from Helena with not only cattle but a piano for the parlor. "I spent 10 years saving most of my earnings while I drifted from case to case," Harrison explained. "Money does no good sitting in a bank while the woman I love goes without." The piano wasn't just a frivolous gift. It was practical recognition of her musical talent and her upcoming teaching position. That thoughtfulness, Danielle was learning, characterized everything Harrison did. April brought their wedding day, simple but joyful. Danielle wore her mother's restored wedding dress, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Harrison looked impossibly handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair tamed for the occasion. They exchanged vows in the white-clapboard church, surrounded by a community that had moved from suspicion to cautious acceptance. "I, Harrison Cole, take thee, Danielle Foster, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his deep voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." When Danielle repeated her vows, she thought of how close she had come to the gallows, how this second chance at life and love had appeared just when all hope seemed lost. Her voice broke slightly on, "until death do us part," and Harrison squeezed her hands in understanding. That evening, after a small reception at the hotel dining room, they returned to the ranch, their ranch now, as husband and wife. Harrison carried her across the threshold of the main house, no longer needing to retreat to the cabin. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor, which had been transformed with fresh paint and the new piano. Danielle looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and then, more gradually, her heart. "I never thought I would have this," she admitted. "After Father died, I expected to live alone, fighting for this land until I couldn't anymore." Harrison tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. "And I never expected to belong anywhere again after the war. We saved each other, I think." Their first night together as husband and wife held both passion and tenderness, the culmination of months of growing love and restrained desire. Harrison proved as considerate a lover as he was a partner, his strength tempered always by gentleness. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Danielle traced the scar on his chest where a Confederate bullet had nearly taken his life at Shiloh, the wound her father had helped heal. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked softly. Harrison considered the question, his hand absently stroking her hair. "I believe in consequences. Your father's kindness created a chain of events that eventually led me to you. Whether that's fate or merely the natural order of good deeds returning to their source, I can't say. Either way, I'm grateful." She pressed a kiss to his scarred chest. "For fate, for consequences, for my father's good heart. For you." Spring flowed into summer, and the Foster Cole Ranch flourished under their joint care. Harrison's investigations occasionally took him away for short periods, but he always returned with the same eagerness, lifting Danielle off her feet in joyful reunion regardless of who might be watching. Word spread about the investigator who had uncovered railway corruption and saved an innocent woman from hanging. New clients sought Harrison's services, and his reputation for integrity and thoroughness grew. He began training an assistant, young Timothy Warren, to handle simpler cases. Danielle's music lessons proved popular with the town's children, bringing additional income and further integrating her back into the community. When she announced her pregnancy that autumn, genuine congratulations poured in from neighbors who had once shunned her. "Full circle," Harrison commented as they sat on the porch swing one evening, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "From town pariah to respected Mrs. Cole in a year. People forget quickly when it's convenient," Danielle observed without bitterness. "Time and happiness had softened her edges. But I haven't forgotten who stood by me when it mattered." Harrison kissed her temple. "Nor have I forgotten the courage of the woman who stood trial alone, head high despite everything aligned against her." Not entirely alone, Danielle corrected, squeezing his hand. A kind stranger intervened just in time and found his future in the process, Harrison finished. In March of 1880, Danielle gave birth to a healthy son they named Jonathan Harrison Cole, honoring both her father and his. As spring returned to the mountains, bringing new calves, fresh grass, and the promise of abundant harvests, the Coles stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold. Harrison wrapped his arms around Danielle from behind, careful not to disturb their sleeping infant in her arms. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. She leaned back against his solid warmth, remembering the fear and loneliness of the previous year, the devastating certainty that she would lose everything, and the moment of hope when a stranger had walked into the courtroom and changed her fate forever. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step of the path, even the painful ones, led me here." The sun dipped below the mountains, bringing the first stars into view above the land that had nearly been taken from her, the land that now sustained 3 lives instead of 1, thanks to justice, courage, and love that had arrived in her darkest hour.